Behind the golden grandeur of Britain's most sacred halls lies a secret, the crown buried for over a century, a child erased from history, whose laughter still haunts the palace walls. Some say it was never born, others swear it never died, only that it's still waiting behind the mirrors. The year was 1897, and Windsor Castle stood as both fortress and mausoleum, a monument to a queen nearing the end of her reign and an empire trembling beneath the weight of its own grandeur. Within its endless corridors, where gaslight flickered against oil portraits of ancestors long turned to dust, there were whispers the crown could not silence. The servants spoke of the **East Wing, a place no one entered after dusk. There, behind locked doors and draped curtains, they said a **child lived one who bore no name in the royal registry, no mention in the Gazette, and no baptism recorded in the Church of England's ledgers. Some called it times Her Majesty's shame, **. Others said it was something far worse. The first to speak openly was Miss Clara Hensley a governess of good reputation, brought to the palace to oversee the education of a distant royal cousin. She lasted 3 weeks. On the night of her disappearance, the footmen heard her pacing the upper hallway, muttering prayers under her breath. Later, her candle was found guttered out on the landing, its wax pooled like blood on the marble floor. Her room was empty save for her rosary, snapped clean in two. The palace physician ruled it a fit of melancholy, but those who had served the royal household long enough knew better. Hensley had been assigned to the East Wing the night before she vanished. In the weeks that followed, the whispers grew bolder. The maids claimed they heard **, a child's laughter **, coming from behind the locked nursery doors, though no children were in residence. The sound, they said, was wrong, hollow, echoing, as if spoken through a pipe. One footman swore he heard **, two voices overlapping **, one high and childish, the other deep and ancient, speaking in unison. He left his post before morning, taking the first train to London and never returning. Even the Queen's personal attendants began to avoid the eastern corridors. They said the air there was always colder, the shadows longer. A nursemaid, polishing silver in an adjoining chamber, found tiny handprints pressed into the inside of a window pane, though the glass was sealed and coated with years of dust. The palace chaplain, when summoned to bless the corridor, refused to proceed beyond the threshold, murmuring that times some doors are not meant to be opened, even by kings, **. And yet, despite every effort to erase the rumors, the unease lingered. Windsor's East Wing remained locked, guarded, and officially unoccupied. But those who worked the night watch claimed that when the wind turned cold from the river and the castle walls groaned with age, a soft humming could be heard from within, the lilting sound of a lullaby, sung in a voice no one could trace, to a child that history never dared to name. The archives of Windsor Castle are a labyrinth of forgotten centuries, narrow corridors lined with shelves sagging beneath the weight of the empire's memory. There, beneath dust and dim light, where time itself seems to hesitate, archivist Edmund Lyle spent his days cataloging the mundane relics of monarchy, ledgers, portraits, letters yellowed by decay. He was not a man prone to superstition. Yet on a winter morning in 1898, as frost crept across the high windows and the castle's bells tolled faintly through the stone, he uncovered something that did not belong. It was a canvas, unmarked in the royal inventory, wrapped in rotted linen and bound with twine brittle as old bone. The handwriting on the tag was almost illegible, save for one line scrawled in iron gall ink, *, East Wing Nursery 1897. Lyle frowned. The East Wing had been sealed for months, its entry forbidden even to senior staff. He hesitated before cutting the twine, and when the linen fell away, the air in the room seemed to still. The portrait beneath was of a **, child, asterisk asterisk, perhaps 6 or 7 years old, dressed in the pale finery of the late Victorian court. But it was not the elegance of the painting that struck Lyle, it was the eyes. They were too knowing, too old, reflecting something far beyond innocence. There was depth in them, an ancient weariness that seemed to follow him wherever he moved. He swore, later, that the expression changed as he looked, from sorrow to recognition, to something that felt almost like pity. At the bottom of the canvas, a single phrase had been etched into the paint with the handle of the brush itself. Asterisk. For Her Majesty from below. Asterisk. No signature, no crest. Only that haunting dedication. Lyle, unnerved, searched the registry for any mention of the artist. He found one entry, dated late 1896, asterisk asterisk, Alaric Dufresne, asterisk asterisk, French-born court painter, known for his striking realism and erratic temperament. The following year, Dufresne had reportedly set fire to his studio and perished inside it, though witnesses swore they heard him laughing as the flames took him. His last recorded words, scribbled in the margins of a sketchbook later found in the ashes, read simply, asterisk, I painted what I saw. Asterisk. When the archivist reported his discovery to the keeper of the royal collection, the man's face blanched. He instructed Lyle, in the firmest tone of command, to reseal the painting and make no record of its existence. But Lyle could not resist one final look before obeying. In the candle's flicker, he thought he saw the faintest movement, the child's lips curving into a small, secret smile. The flame guttered, and when the light returned, the smile was gone. Only the eyes remained, dark and endless, watching as the archivist wrapped the portrait once more and sealed it away in silence. In 1979, Buckingham Palace underwent one of its quiet renovations, the kind never announced to the public, carried out by small teams of trusted specialists sworn to discretion. Among them was asterisk asterisk Dr. Simon Hargrave, asterisk asterisk, a BBC historian permitted rare access to the palace's architectural blueprints for an upcoming documentary series on hidden royal chambers. Hargrave was a meticulous man, not prone to sensationalism, but his fascination with the Victorian period bordered on obsession. It was during a late-night review of the Queen's drawing room schematics that he noticed something impossible, a space marked between the east corridors that appeared in no later drafts, a narrow chamber sealed off entirely after 1901. The annotation beside it was faded, but legible enough: Times, Nursery, East Extension, asterisk. Curiosity became compulsion. With the permission of a cautious curator, Hargrave led a small team to investigate the anomaly. Dust billowed from every step as they pried open the aged plaster wall behind an ornamental bookcase. The sound echoed like a sigh through the empty hall. When the last panel gave way, the beam of Hargrave's flashlight met air untouched for nearly 80 years. The room beyond was small, still, and suffocatingly cold. Dust lay thick as snow upon the furniture. A tiny iron cradle, a rocking horse with cracked paint, a shelf of children's books so decayed their titles had become ghosts of letters. Yet everything was strangely preserved, as if waiting. The cradle, ornate but tarnished, still bore the faint impression of a small head upon its pillow, a hollow in the dust where something had once rested. On the wall above it, faint discoloration marked where a painting had once hung, removed long ago. One of the workers, a young electrician, crouched to inspect the floorboards and recoiled sharply. There, along the wooden planks and the inside of the nursery door, were asterisk asterisk gouges asterisk asterisk deep, desperate scratches carved by fingernails or something far sharper. They trailed upward toward the latch, as if someone inside had clawed to be let out. From the inside, the electrician whispered. The team fell silent, the hum of the palace air vents suddenly deafening. Hargrave photographed everything, his hands trembling. Later, when the prints developed, the images showed faint shapes not visible in the room, impressions in the dust resembling the outlines of small feet, circling the cradle. By dawn, the chamber had been sealed once more under order of palace security. The BBC episode that aired later that year made no mention of the discovery. Dr. Hargrave resigned from the network shortly afterward, citing nervous exhaustion. In private correspondence later leaked by his widow, he described hearing the faint creak of a rocking cradle each night for weeks after, and once, in the reflection of his study window, the fleeting shape of a child standing behind him, smiling through a layer of dust older than memory itself. In the final years of Queen Victoria's reign, Lady Margaret Ashcombe occupied a privileged yet precarious position within the royal household. As one of Her Majesty's ladies-in-waiting, she was both confidant and captive, bound by loyalty, propriety, and the heavy silence expected of those who served the crown. To the world, she was a model of grace and discretion. Yet within the confines of her chamber at Windsor, she kept a secret that would not surface for nearly a century, a small, leather-bound journal hidden beneath the false bottom of her jewelry case. The diary began innocuously enough: notes on the Queen's health, court gossip, the endless tedium of ceremony. But as the entries progressed into the winter of 1897, the tone changed. The handwriting grew erratic, the margins crowded with hastily crossed lines. "There is crying in the East Wing again. She wrote on December 2nd. The servants deny it, yet I hear it each night near the clock's last chime, a child's cry, thin as a blade, answered by whispers I cannot place." Ah! Weeks later, she recorded being summoned to the Queen's private study at an hour no court lady would expect. Victoria, pale and visibly trembling, spoke not as monarch but as mother. "You will instruct the household that no one speaks of the Eastern child she said. "No one sees, no one prays, it must end with me." Lady Ashcombe wrote that the Queen's eyes glistened as she spoke those words, yet there was a coldness in her tone that silenced any reply. The entries that followed became increasingly distressed. Servants dismissed for hearing too much, curtains drawn over interior doors, footsteps pacing behind locked panels where no corridor existed. On January 14th, Lady Ashcombe described being awakened by what she called the sound of small hands striking the glass. When she dared open her door, the hall beyond was dark and empty, yet condensation traced the outline of fingers along her own mirror, as if from the other side. The diary ended abruptly in March of 1898, after one final entry: "The Queen prayed tonight longer than I have ever seen her pray. I believe she fears her own blood." After that, Lady Ashcombe resigned her post and withdrew to her family's estate in Devon, where she lived out her days in quiet isolation. When the diary was discovered in 1974 among the effects of her great-granddaughter, its contents were nearly destroyed by age, yet the ink remained legible. The Royal Archives immediately sought to reclaim it, citing matters of state confidentiality, but for a few brief weeks the press caught wind of its existence, and whispers of the Eastern Child times resurfaced. Historians who read the surviving pages remarked that the descriptions matched almost perfectly the sealed nursery later uncovered in Buckingham Palace. The diary was subsequently acquired by the Crown and sealed away once more. Its final words, however, were copied by a researcher before it disappeared again. "There are sounds no throne can silence. I have heard them in the dark." The transcript was discovered by accident in 1968, misfiled among a collection of Edwardian medical correspondences held in the National Archives. It was labeled only Patient 47, Florence Maybrick 1903, Bethlehem Hospital. The pages were thin, typewritten from a fragile carbon copy, but the words they carried were anything but ordinary. Florence Maybrick had once been a midwife of respectable standing, contracted briefly to the royal household during the late Victorian period. Her descent into madness, and her eventual confinement to the asylum, was attributed to what the attending physician described as post-traumatic hysteria following obstetric complications. But what she claimed to have witnessed inside Buckingham Palace in the summer of 1897 had been quietly erased from every official record. The transcript began with the doctor's calm voice. Asterisk. Mrs. Maybrick, can you recall the night in question? Asterisk. There was a pause, the faint crackle of the phonograph cylinder, before her trembling reply. Asterisk. The storm had begun hours before, Doctor. The windows shook as though the heavens were trying to enter. They sent for me at midnight, a birth, they said, premature and delicate. I was told not to speak to anyone, not to ask whose child it was. But when I entered that chamber, I knew. Asterisk? She described the Queen herself waiting in the adjoining room, veiled and silent, while the laboring mother lay pale upon the bed, attended by 2 physicians and a priest. They did not look at the child when he came, she whispered, only at me, as though they expected me to lie. The boy was stillborn, his skin pale blue, his eyes half open but lifeless. Florence cleaned and wrapped the infant, reciting the prayers for the dead as thunder rolled through the palace halls. He was gone, she said. Stone cold. The Queen left without a word. We were to prepare him for burial before dawn. Then came the impossible moment. Asterisk. At 6 hours past his death, asterisk, she told the doctor, her voice breaking into sobs, asterisk, the cradle shook. I thought it was the storm, but the air was still. When I looked, his chest was rising. His eyes, oh God, his eyes opened, black as the clouds outside. He took one breath, and the windows shattered. The priest began to scream. Asterisk. She claimed the others fled, that only she remained, paralyzed by terror, as the child began to cry a sound she swore was not human. It came from 2 mouths, though he had only one. The transcript ended abruptly. The final note, written in the doctor's hand, read, asterisk, patient refuses nourishment, claims the child still visits her bedside during storms. Eyes remained fixed on ceiling corner. Prognosis, incurable, asterisk. Florence Maybrick was found dead in her cell a week later, her body untouched but her sheets soaked as if from rain, though the night was clear. The asylum matron who discovered her reported a faint lullaby echoing down the corridor, a tune no one recognized. Yet every nurse swore they had heard before. The surviving fragments of Dr. Charles Elwood's journal were never meant for public eyes. They were found decades later in a sealed tin box, recovered from the foundation stones of an old physician's residence near Hyde Park, pages warped by damp, yet the ink somehow preserved. The entries were dated June of 1897, written in a precise and clinical hand that gradually dissolved into a trembling scrawl. What they revealed was not the record of an ordinary medical case, but the unraveling of a man confronted with something beyond the reach of his science. Elwood had served the Crown for nearly 20 years. He was a rational man, educated at Oxford, trained to dissect mystery with logic and reason. Yet his private account of the birth that summer betrays a terror no rational mind could contain. The first entry describes his summons to Buckingham Palace under extraordinary secrecy. Her Majesty requests complete discretion, he wrote. A matter of health concerning the family, no official record. He noted the storm outside, the air thick with static, and the peculiar insistence that no electric lights be used during the delivery. Only candle flame. In his later pages, the tone shifts from professional to haunted. At 3:47 a.m., he recorded, the infant was declared stillborn. No pulse, no respiration. Midwife administered final rites. At 9:46 a.m., the body convulsed. Pulse irregular, then multiple a secondary rhythm, as though 2 hearts beat within one chest. His handwriting became jagged, ink splattering in uneven strokes. The cry came next, he wrote, and with it the voice. It was layered, harmonic, 2 tones at once, like the echo of a choir in a single throat. The child wept, and the sound pressed against my skull as if the air itself bent around it. Elwood detailed his efforts to examine the phenomenon scientifically, the child's pulse fluctuating between extremes, his breath visible in patterns that defied respiration. He ended one note with a plea, asterisk. The Queen forbids baptism. She says the priest who attempted it will not return. I must resign my post. Asterisk. 3 days after his final entry, his body was discovered in the Serpentine, face upward, eyes open. The coroner called it a drowning, though his lungs contained no water, only air, compressed unnaturally, as if something had forced the breath from him. Among his possessions was a small notebook sealed with wax, containing a single line repeated dozens of times, asterisk. It was not a child that was born, it was something returned. Asterisk. The palace issued no statement. His death was recorded as a tragic accident, and his notes were quietly confiscated by the Crown's archivist. But one attendant at the inquest swore that, as the doctor's body lay upon the slab, a faint, rhythmic vibration came from his chest, a double pulse, fading only when the candles were snuffed out. Lord Julian Ashcombe had always been a shadow at the edge of the royal family's light, legitimate enough to dine among them on formal occasions, but never close enough to belong. His lineage was a delicate matter, a great-grandson of George IV, through an affair long buried beneath polite genealogy. Yet his education, charm, and unshakable curiosity had earned him quiet favor within certain corners of court society. It was that curiosity, however, that would undo him. In the spring of 1902, a slim manuscript began circulating privately among publishers in London. It bore no author's name, only the title asterisk, The 12th Heir, a study in royal lineage and divine inheritance. Asterisk. Within its pages were speculations so heretical, so precise in their implication, that even the hint of authorship could ruin a man. The pamphlet proposed that the British crown had been touched by an unnatural continuation of flesh, a being born not once but twice, outside the ordinances of God and nature. The writing was polished, the tone clinical, almost reverent, but its meaning unmistakable. It described a child who bears the wisdom of age and the face of innocence, one who grows toward the womb, not away from it. The manuscript never reached the public. Within a week, all known copies were seized under orders of the Home Office, and the printer's plates destroyed. Lord Julian was quietly summoned to a private audience with 2 officials from the palace's intelligence bureau. He was not arrested, that would have drawn attention. Instead, he was relocated for health reasons to a family estate in the Scottish Highlands, forbidden from travel or correspondence, without approval. The official statement read that he had retired to pursue literary study. The truth was exile. Yet letters survived a dozen, smuggled to a Catholic priest in Inverness, with whom Julian had shared his doubts and fears. In them he described nightmares of a small figure walking the corridors at Windsor, face unchanging as years passed around it. He spoke of hearing the Queen herself refer to the Eternal Son, and of a portrait, hidden in the East Wing, of a child who never appeared in royal archives. In one letter dated September 1903, his tone wavered between confession and dread. Asterisk. It grows younger, Father. Each account I've uncovered suggests the same pattern. The child diminishes with time, not aging but unmaking, as though the years peel away from him one by one. Soon there will be nothing left but the cry. Asterisk. 2 months later, the priest received a final envelope, empty save for a lock of blonde hair tied with a strip of velvet and a single line scrawled across the flap. Asterisk. He has come to me. Asterisk. Lord Julian was found drowned in the loch beside his estate, his face serene, his hands folded as though in prayer. The authorities called it suicide, but locals told another story of a young boy seen wandering the heather that night, barefoot, humming an old lullaby that no one in the village had ever heard before. It was the autumn of 1899 when the command was issued quietly, without ceremony, as though darkness itself had whispered it. Every curtain in Buckingham Palace was to be drawn before dusk. Lamps were dimmed to their lowest wick, mirrors covered or removed entirely. The order came directly from the Queen's private secretary, yet all understood from whom it truly originated. "No light in the East Wing," the message read. No reflection, no glass. No explanation accompanied it, but those who had served long enough sensed that something unseen had stirred again within the royal walls. The night it began, the weather turned unnaturally still. The air hung heavy with static, the sky swollen with clouds that refused to break. The palace corridors seemed to hold their breath. Servants moved in pairs, speaking only in whispers. Those assigned to the eastern halls performed their duties quickly, refusing to meet their own reflections in the gilt mirrors that lined the walls. Several swore later that the reflections no longer moved in rhythm with their bodies. One maid dropped her candlestick in terror when the flame in the mirrored glass continued to burn after she had extinguished the real one. At 9 o'clock, the Queen herself appeared, veiled and silent, flanked by 2 guards. She moved through the darkened corridors of the East Wing, stopping before each mirror, each polished surface, each window pane that caught the faintest glint of lamplight. "Cover them," she said softly. "All of them." Her voice trembled, though with anger or fear, none could tell. The last mirror, a great Venetian glass taller than a man, was too heavy to remove. Instead, black velvet was nailed over its face. When the hammer struck the final nail, a sound like a child's laughter echoed faintly through the hall. By midnight, the palace was shrouded in darkness. From the servants' quarters below, muffled noises drifted through the floorboards, footsteps that seemed to come and go without direction, a low humming, and once, the distinct sound of small knuckles tapping against glass. One footman, emboldened by drink, crept to the east corridor to investigate. He returned moments later, pale and shaking, insisting he had seen a child's face looking out from the mirror beneath the velvet, pressing against the fabric from within. For days after, the Queen would not allow sunlight into the palace. Visitors noted her exhaustion, the strange black coverings draped across windows even at breakfast. When asked, she dismissed it as a period of mourning for a distant relation. Yet, among the household staff, the tale grew. They said the child had learned to move where light and reflection met, slipping between the mirrored worlds as easily as walking through a door. When dawn finally came and the curtains were lifted, the great Venetian mirror was found cracked from corner to corner, its surface cold to the touch, and on the inside of the velvet covering, the faint impression of 2 small handprints pressed there from the other side. In February of 1900, amid the final years of Queen Victoria's reign, a visitor arrived at Buckingham Palace whose name never appeared in the court circular, whose carriage bore no crest, and whose entry was made not through the grand gates, but through a side passage usually reserved for deliveries. His name was Cardinal Matteo Bellini ***, a scholar of theology and metaphysical phenomena, dispatched unofficially from the Vatican under the guise of a diplomatic observer. In truth, he was something else entirely, a man known among certain clerical circles as Time's Il Confessor delle Ombre ***, the confessor of shadows. Bellini's arrival was preceded by rumors within Rome of unnatural disturbances, afflicting the English crown, events whispered of even within the cloisters of St. Peter's. The papal nuncio's correspondence, later unearthed by historians, referred cryptically to the child whose baptism was denied, yet whose breath persists. Whatever reached the Holy See was enough to compel Bellini's quiet journey across the Channel. The Queen received him privately, late in the evening, accompanied only by her physician and one trusted attendant. No minutes were kept, no witnesses sworn. What transpired in that meeting would be known only through the notes the cardinal kept hidden in a leather-bound journal discovered years later in the Vatican's restricted archives. According to his account, Her Majesty was pale and trembling, her once imperious voice softened by fear. She spoke of a child who, lived but should not have, a boy of royal blood whose presence had brought with it a curse of mirrors, whispers, and premature deaths among those who dared to approach him. He does not age as other children do, she confessed. Some nights he appears older, other nights, smaller, as though the years pass backward and forward like the tides. I have prayed for his peace, but prayer has not reached him. Bellini wrote that he requested to see the child, but was led instead to an empty nursery deep in the east wing. The air, he noted, was wrong, too still, too heavy, as though the breath of the living had been pressed out by the lingering of the dead. Upon the cradle, covered in white lace now yellowed with time, lay a single black feather. The cardinal performed rites of cleansing and recited prayers of release, yet he felt no shift in the air, no easing of the invisible pressure. Instead, he wrote, "Something times watched times from the shadows, unseen yet aware." In his final entry before returning to Rome, Bellini recorded a chilling conclusion, asterisk. The royal soul remains bound between realms, neither dead nor fully born. It is an echo of sin and sorrow, reverberating through the generations. Should the bloodline persist unbroken, the echo will awaken again, louder, until it consumes its origin. Asterisk. The Vatican classified his report as apocryphal and buried it within the archives of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. But a clerk, years later, copied one phrase in the margins before sealing it away forever. Asterisk. Every crown must one day pay its price in blood. Asterisk. When Bellini died in 1902, his personal effects were inventoried by the church. Among them was a small silver rattle engraved with the royal crest of England, and a note in the cardinal's own hand. Asterisk. He is not gone, only sleeping. Asterisk. When Queen Victoria died in January of 1901, an era ended not only for the empire, but for the quiet, haunted rooms of Buckingham Palace. The court mourned in solemn procession, the black draperies of grief cascading down every hall. Yet beneath the official mourning, there was a second, quieter order, one whispered from the lips of the Queen's most trusted chamberlain to a select few who would understand the urgency. The East Wing was to be sealed permanently, its rooms emptied, its passageways bricked, its existence erased from all inventories. The order was carried out swiftly, with the same cold precision that had long defined the monarchy's darkest secrets. The work began 3 days after the state funeral. The builders, drawn from among the most discreet craftsmen in London, were told they were reinforcing unstable foundations. None questioned it. The palace foreman, a pragmatic man named Albert Finch, later told his wife that something about the assignment unsettled him from the start. "We weren't fixing walls," he said. "We were burying them." The corridor leading to the nursery was lined with dust thick as soot, untouched for years. The air smelled faintly of iron and wilted flowers. When they pried open the nursery door, light spilled into a chamber preserved in unnatural stillness, the rocking horse, the shelf of tiny books, the cracked mirror covered in faded velvet. And there, in the center, stood the cradle. The first cradle, that is. Gilded, small, and lined with moth-eaten silk. But as the workers began dismantling the room, Finch noticed another shape, half buried beneath a shroud of rotted drapery in the far corner. It was a second cradle, identical in design but slightly larger, as if meant for a child who had grown but never lived. Its interior was empty, save for a wreath of dried roses, their petals blackened and brittle. Around the rim of the cradle, etched in shallow lines, were words in Latin that no one could translate on sight. The builders swore they heard something faint, a sound like the echo of a sigh as the last of the roses crumbled beneath the draft. When Finch reported the discovery, a pale man from the royal household arrived within the hour. He ordered everyone out, took the cradle away under a black cloth, and told the foreman to continue the sealing, without delay and without curiosity. By nightfall, the door had been bricked over, plastered, and painted to match the corridor. Within a day, it was as though no nursery had ever existed there at all. The official palace blueprints were quietly amended, the east wing shortened by a few feet. No record remained of the room or its contents. Finch never spoke publicly, though in his old age, he sometimes muttered to his grandchildren of a crying that came from behind the walls. And once, when his son inherited his tools, he found a small object wrapped in oilcloth at the bottom of the box, a dried rose petal, pressed flat, the color of old blood. On it was faint writing, in an elegant Victorian hand, asterisk, for the child who was, and the child who was not. Asterisk. The fire began on the evening of December 9th, 1936, the same week the world learned that King Edward VIII would give up his crown. The palace was heavy with tension, its grand halls thick with rumor and disapproval. Servants whispered that the royal bloodline itself seemed to recoil at the scandal. The king's departure was not merely political, they said. It was spiritual, an omen that something buried deep within the monarchy had begun to stir again. When the flames came, it was almost as if the building itself had chosen that moment to purge what could no longer be contained. The first to see it was a night watchman stationed near the east wing, the oldest and least used part of the palace. At 10:30, he noticed a faint orange flicker behind the frosted glass of a corridor window. By the time he raised the alarm, the fire had already spread with unnatural speed, leaping from one sealed room to another as though it knew exactly where it wished to go. The smoke carried a strange, acrid scent, not of timber or oil, but of scorched fabric and old varnish. Witnesses later reported hearing what sounded like the creak of a cradle amid the crackling wood. Fire brigades arrived within minutes, their hoses snaking across the lawns, but the heat within the east wing was so intense that no one could approach. The flames climbed the walls in columns of gold and black, devouring decades of history. Portraits, documents, heirlooms, all were consumed in a single, furious hour. Yet even as the blaze reached its peak, several onlookers, including 2 guards and a footman, swore they saw a figure within the inferno. It was small, like a child, one testified later, voice trembling. It stood in the center of the hall, just standing there. The fire bent around it, like it couldn't touch. Another witness claimed the figure turned its head toward him, eyes glinting through the smoke, and smiled. When the flames were finally subdued in the early hours of morning, investigators found something deeply unsettling. The fire had burned through walls of stone and steel beams, yet the nursery area long sealed since the Queen's death remained intact. The brickwork was blackened, but the door itself was unscathed. On the threshold, among the soot and ash, lay a single object, a child's shoe, charred but still holding its shape. Inside it, they found a tuft of white ash that smelled faintly of roses. The official report attributed the blaze to faulty electrical wiring, despite the fact that the East Wing's power lines had been removed decades earlier. The surviving blueprints of the damaged rooms were quietly withdrawn from the Royal Archive, and the section was once again sealed off. In the months that followed, several workers assigned to the restoration resigned without explanation, claiming they heard soft humming when they entered the burned corridors, a lullaby echoing faintly beneath the scent of smoke, carrying through walls that should have been nothing but cold stone. And though the abdication crisis soon eclipsed every other scandal, one elderly maid who had served under 3 monarchs refused to return to the palace after that night. "It wasn't the fire that frightened me," she said years later. "It was the face in the flames. It looked just like the child in the old stories, the one who was never meant to be born." In 1972, the field of genetics was still a young science, its revelations both thrilling and deeply unsettling to the institutions that had built their power on lineage. The royal family, fascinated by the new promises of hereditary study, discreetly commissioned a private genealogical review of their bloodline. The work was assigned to Dr. Amelia Warren a respected genealogist from Oxford, known for her rigorous discretion and quiet loyalty to the crown. Her task seemed simple: confirm, through modern DNA methods, the purity of royal descent and silence a few persistent rumors that had begun circulating among fringe historians. Yet what began as a matter of record soon became a matter of dread. Dr. Warren was granted access to generations of medical archives, private correspondence, and preserved tissue samples stored under the Royal Medical Office. The early results came back predictable, a parade of noble ancestry stretching neatly through the centuries. But when she reached the 20th century line, something shifted. Certain samples drawn from living descendants displayed chromosomal irregularities unlike anything she had ever documented. The patterns were human, yet mirrored none of the known inheritance markers that should have been passed through the Windsor bloodline. One sequence in particular defied explanation. A genetic duplication in the 12th chromosome, subtle yet identical across three individuals who shared no direct maternal link. At first, she assumed an error in testing. She repeated the process 3 times, each result more impossible than the last. The anomaly appeared ancient, as if the mutation had been introduced generations earlier, preserved and carried forward deliberately. In her notes, she described it poetically: asterisk, a shadow within the blood, dormant but waiting. Asterisk. When she presented her preliminary findings to the royal liaison overseeing her research, his reaction was immediate and chilling. He ordered the report withdrawn, the samples destroyed, and every reference to the irregularity struck from the records. But Warren, meticulous by nature, had kept a duplicate of her work. In the weeks that followed, she confided in a colleague that her data suggested not merely mutation but times division, times the faint trace of a dual genetic origin. It's as though one life split into two, she wrote, a doubling that should not be biologically possible. Not a deformity, but an echo something once whole, now repeating itself through the blood. 2 days after that letter was sent, she was summoned unexpectedly to a private meeting at Clarence House. She never spoke of what occurred there. When she returned to Oxford, she was pale, withdrawn, and refused all further research requests. Her final note in the project ledger read, asterisk, by royal prerogative, results sealed indefinitely. Asterisk. Years later, one of her assistants would claim to have seen a single surviving page from the suppressed report, a table of chromosomal data annotated in red ink. Beside one entry, corresponding to an unnamed member of the royal family, Dr. Warren had written only 5 words. Asterisk. Identical pattern to the first. Asterisk. That page, like the rest of her work, vanished soon after. But in the decades since, whispers have persisted that somewhere within the modern monarchy, a child was born who looked uncannily like one painted in a forgotten portrait nearly a century before, with eyes far too old for their years and blood that hummed like a memory repeating itself. The cassette tape was discovered in 1991, inside a locked tea tin at the back of a dresser in a modest flat in Pimlico. The flat had belonged to Mrs. Edith Holloway once senior housekeeper of Buckingham Palace, who had served through 3 monarchs before her quiet retirement in 1960. She had no surviving family, only a few boxes of keepsakes from her decades of service, and that single tape, labeled in shaky handwriting. Asterisk, for whoever still listens, asterisk. The voice that filled the recording was frail but lucid, carrying the soft, clipped tone of someone who had spent her life in service. The date at the start was the 3rd of November 1978. I don't want to be buried with this in me, she began, her voice trembling as if she feared being overheard even then. It happened long ago, but I can still hear it. Some things don't fade, not in the walls of that place, they stay. A rustle followed, perhaps the sound of her arranging her skirt, and then a sigh. It was the spring of 1954. Her Majesty was away in Balmoral. Only a skeleton staff remained, and I was put in charge of overseeing the West Corridor cleanings. It was quiet then, too quiet, with most of the family gone. The East Wing, of course, was sealed. Has been for as long as anyone remembers. She paused, the faint hum of the recorder filling the silence. I was dusting the wainscoting near the state staircase when I heard it laughter. A child's, at first I thought. High and quick, the kind you hear in the nursery when the little ones play. But there were no children in the palace that week. None. The sound came from behind the plaster, where no door stood anymore. I remember freezing with the duster still in my hand, listening. The laughter went on, then stopped. And after a moment, I heard it again, only this time, it wasn't quite laughter. It was remembering me. Her voice broke then, the breath catching in her throat. That's the part I can't explain. It said my name, softly, almost kindly. Edith. Asterisk, like someone calling an old friend. But no one knew me there by my first name, not the ones behind those walls. She whispered that she ran, though she didn't know where to go, her own reflection flickering in the polished glass as she passed. The air was cold, colder than winter, though it was May. I could feel it breathing behind me like a child pressing its face to the back of a mirror. The tape ended with a scrape of the chair, a nervous cough, and one last line, barely audible beneath the static. It remembers all of us who served it. We scrubbed its floors, dusted its cradle, and thought it dead. But it never was. It's still walking the halls, laughing, waiting for someone to answer. When the tape was turned over to the archives, the audio engineers noted something peculiar in their report. Beneath her final words, almost inaudible to the human ear, was another sound, faint and layered. Like a child's voice echoing her own, repeating the last phrase in perfect synchrony. Asterisk. It's still walking the halls. Asterisk. The existence of Project Morning Child came to light by accident through a clerical oversight during the 2003 declassification of Cold War intelligence files. Amid reports of Soviet espionage and atomic research, a slim folder appeared under an innocuous label, Ancestral Case Study, Internal, The first page carried the royal cipher, the second an MI5 heading, and beneath that, a title so cryptic it bordered on the absurd Times Project Morning Child. Hereditary and Metaphysical Deviations in Lineal Descent. There were no signatures, only initials, and no author listed beyond Department of Applied Intelligence, Section D. The file should not have survived. Most of the project's documentation, it later emerged, had been incinerated 20 years earlier under royal directive. The surviving fragments were clinical, written in the detached tone of scientific bureaucracy. The project, initiated in 1970, was designed to investigate biological and metaphysical inconsistencies within specific members of the royal bloodline. Its purpose was veiled beneath layers of jargon: anomalous replication of genetic patterning, temporal dissonance in physiological aging, and, most disturbingly, local manifestation of consciousness across generational intervals. Though the language was cautious, the implication was extraordinary. MI5 scientists had been instructed to determine whether certain royal descendants exhibited traits that could not be explained by ordinary inheritance. The tests were conducted in secret laboratories beneath an old military hospital outside London. Blood and tissue samples were taken, but so too were psychological and parapsychological measurements, sessions involving isolation chambers, mirrored environments, and low-frequency resonance. One report mentioned spontaneous vocal phenomena during testing, a voice, faint but recorded, whispering from behind the observation glass though no speaker was present. The transcript read simply, "It's awake again." Among the more chilling entries was a memorandum dated June 12, 1974. Subject D3 displayed dissociative age regression, it noted. Chronometric imaging suggests fluctuation in cellular maturity, skin, and bone density, consistent with both adolescence and senescence, within a 48-hour span. Hypothesis: retrogressive biological echo. Attached was a blurred Polaroid showing what appeared to be a young boy's silhouette framed against a mirrored wall. By 1982, the tone of the surviving documents changed from inquiry to alarm. A final summary reported that unauthorized phenomena had occurred during one of the late-stage trials. The specifics were redacted, but a single surviving paragraph, heavily censored, described a breach between reflective surfaces and a mass auditory event consistent with laughter. All personnel were evacuated. The site was sealed and later demolished. The official record declared that all project materials were destroyed for reasons of national security and moral propriety. Yet one handwritten note, left unsigned in the margin of the final page, escaped redaction. It read, "*Termination ineffective. The anomaly persists. Recommend containment at hereditary source." Below it, someone had drawn a single line across the paper and scrawled 3 words in ink darker than the rest. "The child remains." To this day, the government denies that Project Morning Child ever existed. But those who handled the recovered file before it was withdrawn described an unease that lingered for weeks afterward: flickers in polished surfaces, voices on unrecorded frequencies, and once, the faint scent of roses in a room with no flowers. In the winter of 1998, during a restoration survey of Buckingham Palace's vast private art collection, Arthur Pembroke, senior conservator to the royal household, was tasked with cleaning a neglected 19th-century canvas listed simply as Time's Portrait of an Unknown Child. The painting had hung for decades in a dim storage attic, too cracked and yellowed to draw attention. Pembroke assumed it was another Victorian sentimental piece, one of thousands that filled the palace archives. He began with gentle solvents and brushes, working under the weak beam of a lamp that flickered whenever the temperature dipped below freezing. It was only when he removed the first layers of discolored varnish that he realized something strange was hidden beneath. The face emerging from the grime was not that of a cherubic aristocrat. The features were delicate but eerily familiar eyes, too large for the frame, the faintest curve of a smile that seemed to shift with the light. When he checked the catalogue entry, he found a date, 1897, and a single cryptic annotation written in the old archivist's hand, "for Her Majesty," from below. His pulse quickened. He knew that phrase. Every restorer in royal service had heard the whispered story of a painting that had driven its artist mad. Pembroke contacted the conservation lab to perform an infrared scan, hoping to identify any earlier composition beneath the visible surface. When the images came through, the technicians fell silent. The underlayer revealed another painting, the same child, rendered with astonishing realism, but with one profound difference. In the original version, the eyes had been open. In the current visible layer, they were closed, as if someone had deliberately painted them shut. "It's a palimpsest," one technician murmured, staring at the spectral image. Someone tried to bury it. That night, alone in the attic, Pembroke inspected the portrait again under low light. The candle flame seemed to dance in the varnish, and for an instant, he swore the eyelids trembled. He laughed it off, but the air grew colder, heavy with a faint scent of burnt roses. He documented every detail in his log, though his handwriting grew unsteady. "The eyes," he wrote, "no longer appear closed when viewed obliquely. The expression changes a kind of half-wakefulness." By morning, the Restoration Department received a sealed directive from the Royal Collection Trust ordering that the work cease immediately. All photographic records of the scan were to be destroyed. Pembroke protested the discovery was historically significant, but the courier's tone left no room for argument. Within the week, the painting was removed from the attic and replaced with an empty frame marked Times, transferred for storage. 2 months later, Pembroke resigned. In a letter never sent but found among his papers after his death, he described one final visit to the attic to collect his tools. The canvas was gone, he wrote, but in its place, the wall showed two small handprints in dust, and between them, the faint outline of eyes open again. In the spring of 1995, the BBC's historical department greenlit a late-night documentary special intended to coincide with the anniversary of Queen Victoria's death. The working title, Victoria's Secret Child, was deliberately provocative, the kind of phrase that drew both outrage and curiosity. The project was spearheaded by Malcolm Havers, a veteran producer known for his meticulous research and his appetite for stories that brushed the edge of scandal. What began as a conventional investigation into long-dismissed palace rumors soon became something far darker. Havers had gained access to declassified archives, including fragments of correspondence, restricted blueprints, and one surviving photograph from the palace's sealed East Wing. He worked closely with historians and former palace staff, piecing together a narrative that hinted at an illegitimate royal birth in 1897, one officially erased from record. Colleagues later recalled that the deeper he dug, the more obsessive he became. It wasn't about the story anymore, his assistant said. It was about finding proof that the child existed. The final edit, completed on May 17, was set to air the following evening. Havers packed the master tape himself, placing it in his briefcase before boarding the 5:40 p.m. train from Bath to London. He never arrived. The last confirmed sighting placed him on the platform at Paddington, waiting for a car that had been sent by the studio. Security cameras showed him standing alone, briefcase in hand. At 7:22 p.m., he glanced over his shoulder, not in alarm, but in recognition, as if someone familiar had called his name. The footage cut there. The car service reported no pickup. By midnight, the BBC received a terse call from an anonymous number. Cancel the broadcast. When the briefcase was eventually recovered from a locker at King's Cross 3 days later, the master tape inside was blank. Technicians confirmed that the magnetic data had been erased, not damaged, but overwritten by uniform interference. Only one frame survived, burned into the visual leader at the start of the reel, the silhouette of a small child standing in a palace window, hands pressed to the glass. The image flickered for less than a second before cutting to static. The network quietly shelved the project, citing editorial inconsistencies. The production team dispersed. One researcher emigrated, another left television entirely. Havers was never found. His car, discovered weeks later abandoned near Windsor Great Park, contained only a single object on the passenger seat, a child's shoe, cracked and faded, tagged with an evidence label from 1936. Those who handled the erased tape described a persistent distortion that remained in their equipment long after, a faint echo caught on every subsequent recording. It wasn't sound exactly, more a rhythm, like breathing. And though Victoria's Secret Child Times never aired, bootleg copies of the lost documentary's promotional trailer occasionally surface among collectors. In its final frame, as the narrator's voice fades, a faint reflection can be seen in the palace window behind him, the same child's silhouette, watching, waiting for the story to be told again. The renovations at Windsor Castle began as part of a modernization initiative following years of public scrutiny over royal expenditures. In 2003, scaffolding wrapped the ancient stone walls, and contractors from across the country were brought in to restore sections of the castle that had not been touched since Queen Victoria's reign. Among these was a long disused corridor in the eastern quarter, a narrow hall that had been sealed in the aftermath of a partial ceiling collapse in 1899. When workers reopened it, they found layers of soot and plaster covering what appeared to be an untouched fragment of the past ornate moldings, faded wallpaper, and a stretch of white marble flooring that gleamed faintly under dust. It was here that they found the handprint. It was first noticed by Paul Latham, an electrician running wiring through the old plasterwork. He thought it was a stain, a dark smudge against the marble, shaped like a small hand pressed flat against the stone. But when he touched it, he jerked back, startled. The mark wasn't paint or soot, it was times burned times into the marble itself, the veins of the stone warped and blackened under the shape of tiny fingers. The edges were smooth, almost polished, as though whatever had left it had done so in an instant of unbearable heat. The print measured precisely that of a 6-year-old child. Supervisors halted work immediately. Security teams were called in to photograph the anomaly, but the cameras malfunctioned. Each frame came back fogged with streaks of white light. Palace archivists arrived the following morning, and by that evening, the corridor was sealed off again officially due to structural concerns. Unofficially, whispers spread through the crew. One guard reported hearing what he described as bare feet on marble late that night. Another swore he saw movement in the hallway beyond the plastic, sheeting a pale shape gliding just out of reach of his flashlight. The security cameras told their own story. At precisely 3:11 a.m., motion sensors in the East Wing activated. The footage, later reviewed in the security office, showed the long, dark corridor illuminated by a single swinging bulb. Then, from the far end, something appeared, a small figure, pale and barefoot, moving slowly toward the camera. Its head was slightly tilted, the posture that of a child watching something unseen. As it passed beneath the light, the image warped, lines of static crawling across the frame. For an instant, the figure seemed to look directly into the lens, and the feed cut to black. The official report attributed the event to light distortion and electrical interference. Yet that same week, 3 workers resigned without notice, claiming an unnatural presence in the East Wing. One left a note for the site manager that read only, *, "It knows when you see it, *. The burned handprint was later removed by royal request. The section of marble was cut from the floor and transferred to an undisclosed location. However, a private contractor leaked a photograph taken before its removal, a grainy image showing the handprint in perfect clarity, the blackened veins of the marble radiating outward like cracks in ice. Forensic analysts who reviewed the image noted an impossible detail. The handprint was not recessed, but raised, as though the stone itself had grown upward around the impression not burned in. But times pushed out from below. *. In the summer of 2015, palace physicians were summoned quietly and without announcement to Kensington. Their patient was not gravely ill, at least not in body, but the concern came from higher authority. A young heir second in line, beloved by the public, had begun waking in the early hours, screaming. The details of the episodes were never recorded in official medical reports, but through whispers and leaked notes, the story took form. The child spoke of times a mirror room, times and a cradle that rocked on its own, though he had never seen such a room in the palace, and there were no cradles anywhere near his apartments. At first, it was thought to be the ordinary terror of dreams, the growing mind inventing shadows from overheard stories. His nanny described it as a phase, yet the child's description of the room was so precise that it unnerved even the most skeptical staff. He spoke of mirrored walls, old wallpaper, and a crown on the cradle that breathes. When asked where he had seen it, he answered simply, "In the glass. The child in there shows me." One of the physicians, Dr. Alfred Linton, attempted to treat the dreams through suggestion therapy, but the sessions only made things worse. The boy began humming a tune during sleep, soft, lilting, in a minor key. Linton assumed it was something he'd picked up from television or a storybook, until the palace archivist, overhearing the melody, reportedly turned white. The tune matched a transcribed lullaby found in the long-suppressed diary of Lady Ashcombe, written more than a century earlier. "Sleep, my shadow, hush thy breath, rest thy crown and mimic death." After that revelation, access to the child was restricted. Linton's notes were confiscated under the Official Secrets Act, and he was reassigned within a week. Privately, he told a colleague that the boy's condition felt less like illness and more like inheritance. He described a night when he entered the nursery to find the child sitting upright in bed, eyes open but unseeing, whispering to the wall mirror. "He's still waiting in the room. He says it's my turn to wake." The palace downplayed the rumors, attributing the heir's fatigue to academic pressures. Yet during that autumn, multiple staff members requested transfers from the children's wing. One nanny resigned abruptly after claiming she saw the reflection of another child in the mirror standing beside the heir, though he was alone in the room. In a final, unverified report, a palace security log recorded motion sensors triggering at precisely 2:46 a.m. outside the nursery. The cameras caught nothing, only a flicker of movement, like a curtain shifting where no window stood. But when the footage was slowed, frame by frame, a single reflection appeared in the mirrored toy chest at the edge of the room, the faint image of a small cradle, gently rocking, though every object in the nursery was perfectly still. When the monarch passed, the nation mourned in all the expected ways: bells, broadcasts, black veils, and solemn processions. But within the walls of Windsor Castle, another ritual unfolded in silence. For 70 years, the Queen's private archive had been sealed from all but a few hands. Historians and archivists, granted limited access for the transition of documents to the Royal Collection Trust, were told they would find only letters, treaties, and the mundane relics of a long reign. But what they encountered inside that narrow chamber was something else entirely. The private archive was smaller than expected, a single vault lit by low lamps, lined with cedar drawers. Most files were perfectly ordinary: correspondences with prime ministers, handwritten reflections, even childhood sketches. Yet among the tidy boxes rested one thin, yellowing envelope, its wax seal unbroken. On the front, in fading ink, were 7 words written in the late Queen's precise hand: asterisk, the 13th birth, for God's eyes only. Asterisk. The archivists hesitated. The Queen's personal documents were not to be opened without authorization from the Crown, but the note had been catalogued for review under the death protocol. After an hour of quiet deliberation, the senior historian, Dr. Henrietta Moore, gently broke the seal. The envelope contained no letter, no photograph, only a small lock of black hair tied with a fraying red ribbon. No tag, no explanation. Just that single, human relic, perfectly preserved. At first, they assumed it belonged to one of Victoria's descendants, a keepsake from centuries past, but the cataloging number printed faintly in the corner suggested otherwise. It was modern, from the post-war era, part of a collection compiled in the 1950 seconds. And more puzzling still, the accession register listed no 13th birth anywhere in royal record. The Queen had 4 children. Her mother, 1. Her grandmother, also 4. Nowhere did the number 13 appear in any branch of the lineage. Dr. Moore requested the corresponding file for verification. The clerk returned pale, empty-handed. "There is no file, ma'am. Just a gap in the sequence. The numbering jumps." They searched the drawers again, tracing through the decades of catalogued births, deaths, and coronations. The missing entry was deliberate. Someone had physically removed the documentation but left behind the envelope, as if it were a message meant to be found later. Later that evening, while photographing the artifact under magnification, a technician noticed something unsettling. The hair was not entirely black. Under certain light, it reflected an unnatural sheen, deep violet, almost iridescent, like oil on water. When analyzed, the strand did not match any recorded DNA profile from the royal family. Nor did it degrade under exposure, behaving as if time itself could not touch it. The next morning, the envelope and its contents were gone. The vault's security log showed no entries between 2 and 4 a.m., though motion sensors briefly triggered near the sealed chamber. When questioned, The night guard hesitated before admitting he'd heard something faint in the corridor, a sound like a lullaby, old and sweet, drifting just beyond the door. The access order was revoked the following day. All staff involved were bound under the Official Secrets Act. But one archivist later confessed, in a letter never sent. Asterisk. The lock of hair was warm to the touch, as if it remembered being part of someone who refused to die. Asterisk. Even in the age of surveillance, renovation, and relentless transparency, there are corners of Buckingham Palace that time refuses to surrender. The East Wing, officially listed as under permanent restoration, remains sealed to this day. No tours pass through it, no cameras record its interior, and those who ask too many questions are politely redirected toward the gift shop. Yet the stories persist. The guides who work the courtyard routes swear they can feel a change in the air when they draw near that side of the palace, a sudden drop in temperature, a heaviness, as though the walls themselves are holding their breath. It is most noticeable at dusk, when the last visitors have gone, and the palace settles into its nightly hum of distant footsteps and soft machinery. The cleaning staff, pragmatic and unsentimental, tell of faint tapping sounds from behind the sealed plaster. One porter described hearing the rhythm of marbles rolling, though the corridor has been closed for over a century. Another refused to return after witnessing a child's toy soldier encased behind glass in a display cabinet turn its head to face the wall overnight. Security cameras, installed to disprove such tales, only deepened the mystery. Twice a year, for reasons technicians cannot explain, every feed along the east facade flickers to static at precisely 3:11 a.m., the same hour once recorded during the Windsor disturbance. Tourists passing through the gardens sometimes report hearing voices from the upper windows, soft, rhythmic murmurs that rise and fall like a lullaby carried by wind. One American visitor, filming the palace facade during the summer opening, captured a brief reflection in one of the nursery panes, a small silhouette standing motionless, hand pressed to the glass. When analyzed, the footage showed no signs of tampering, but the window in question, according to architectural maps, faces an interior wall. The palace staff do not speak openly about these incidents. They have learned that acknowledgement feeds them. Still, there is one night each year when silence cannot contain what lingers. On the anniversary of the Queen's passing, long after the crowds have gone and the Union flags hang limp in the dark, a single sound is said to ripple through the East Wing, a child's laughter. Not cruel, not playful, but knowing. It travels down the marble halls, through locked doors and modern offices, echoing faintly in the broadcast studios below, carried on the ventilation shafts like a secret breath. Those who hear it never forget. Some describe it as distant and hollow, others close enough to feel against their ear. And though the palace remains one of the most guarded buildings in the world, no recording has ever captured the sound. Only those present know it, and those who listen long enough begin to sense what the old servants always whispered. The palace never truly sleeps. It watches. It remembers. And once each year it wakes to remind the living that the child in the mirror never left at all.